It was supposed to be a quiet weekend at my Lake Cabana getaway from the noise, the stress, and everything in between. Just me, a few close friends, and the sound of water gently lapping against the dock. But the peace didn't last long. Not with Karen from the HOA watching everything through her binoculars like a hawk guarding her territory. She's been a problem since day one, writing citations over lawn chairs, accusing people of illegal firewood stacking, and now she's taken things to a whole new level. My friend Chris had barely parked his truck when Karen stormed over, shouting about unauthorized guests and trespassing on private community property. We tried to ignore her, like always, but this time, she wasn't just flapping her gums. There was rage in her eyes. She kept going on about rules, authority, and how she'd spoken to the sheriff personally. We laughed it off. That was our first mistake. 10 minutes later, a shot rang out. Chris collapsed on the ground near the deck, holding his shoulder, blood soaking through his jacket. My ears were ringing. Karen stood there, hands shaking, gun still raised. "I warned you," she screamed, like she expected someone to clap for her. Then she pulled out her phone and dialed 911, telling them she'd just defended herself from a dangerous intruder. But she didn't know who I really was, or what I had waiting just over the ridge. Before the sirens even echoed down the lake road, my team was already in position. Not local police, not state troopers. My federal strike unit, armed and ready to neutralize any threat. Because this wasn't just about HOA politics anymore. And Karen had no clue what she'd triggered. What happened next changed everything. I met Karen about 2 years ago, right after I bought the lake cabin. At first, I thought she was just one of those overly involved neighbors, annoying, but mostly harmless. But I quickly learned she ran the local HOA like a mini government, with herself as the self-appointed sheriff, judge, and jury. She handed out fines like candy, got people's mail held for mailbox paint violations, and once even tried to get my deck torn down because it didn't match community aesthetics. I thought she was just a control freak with too much time on her hands. But now, looking back, I wonder if there was something darker going on under the surface. Thing is, Karen always acted like she knew more than she let on about people, about their pasts. She'd make weird comments like "you don't seem like the cabin type," or "bet you've seen your fair share of things." It was subtle, but unsettling. And now, after what she did to Chris, I couldn't help but wonder if this wasn't some accident, but something planned. See, I'm not just some regular guy with a lakeside property. I've got history, the kind you don't talk about in daylight. After years of working in black ops, I wanted out something quieter, simpler. That cabin was supposed to be my peace. But apparently, peace doesn't come easy when people like Karen are watching your every move. Chris wasn't just a guest either. He was part of the team once. We've been through some real messes together, and now he was bleeding out on my deck because some neighborhood busybody thought she could rewrite the law. I had already signaled my team. They knew what to do if things went sideways. And they were closer than Karen could have ever guessed. What none of us knew yet was just how far this was about to go. The sound of sirens began to echo faintly through the trees. But they weren't coming fast enough. Chris was still conscious, barely gripping my arm with bloodied fingers and trying to speak. I told him to save his strength, but I was already scanning the tree line. My cums crackled in my ear, my second in command, Sierra, whispered, "We're eyes on. You want us to move?" I told her to wait. We needed to see how this played out, and Karen was pacing near the driveway like she expected a parade for what she'd done. Down the road, a couple of neighbors had started to gather. Phones out, whispering, staring at the scene like it was a neighborhood drama unfolding in real time. Karen noticed and immediately launched into her version of events, pointing at Chris and shouting about self-defense. She didn't know we had cameras installed all over the cabin, silent, discreet, but watching everything. And they caught it all. Chris hadn't even raised his voice. He stepped out of the truck, smiled, waved. And that's when Karen fired. No warning, no threat, just straight to panic and violence. What was really strange, though, was the timing. Just a day before this happened, I intercepted a scrambled signal meant for someone in the area. It wasn't HOA related, and it sure wasn't local law enforcement chatter. It was coded, short, and military grade. Something about an asset moving through civilian zones. I didn't think much of it at first, but now, standing over Chris, I started connecting threads that didn't make sense on their own. Karen wasn't acting alone. Or if she was, she had access to something way above her pay grade. And if that's true, then maybe this wasn't just about HOA rules or property lines. Maybe someone wanted to draw me out to test how far I'd go to protect my own. Whatever it was, they were about to find out. Rain started to sprinkle through the trees. Soft at first, then picking up like the sky itself was holding its breath. Chris lay still but stable, pressure bandaged and tucked against the deck railing, my jacket shielding him from the cold. Karen stood with her arms crossed, talking fast to a deputy who had just arrived, young, unsure, and clearly out of his depth. She was spinning her story like she'd rehearsed it. I feared for my life. She kept repeating, louder each time. Eyes darting toward my cabin, maybe wondering if I'd step forward and blow up her lie. But I didn't. I stayed just out of sight, waiting. My team was already moving into formation. Sierra signaled, one vehicle parked by the service road, tinted windows, no plates, doesn't belong here. That chilled me. The same location that scrambled signal had triangulated from? This wasn't just Karen acting out of control. Someone had placed her in this position, or worse, was backing her up. Inside, I opened the encrypted tablet stashed beneath the floorboards. I hadn't touched it in months. One swipe, and my entire surveillance system came online. Thermal cams, perimeter sensors, even audio uplinks. I scanned through the footage again. Karen never hesitated. Her grip on that gun, her stance. It wasn't clumsy. It was trained. That's when it hit me. She didn't just have access to something bigger. She was part of it. Then Sierra's voice crackled again, tight and urgent. Movement. 3 tangos, dressed tactical, no insignia, coming from the woods behind the cabin. I looked up. Shadows shifted through the trees, slow but certain. Not local law enforcement, not anyone from around here. This was something coordinated, something deliberate. I pulled my sidearm, heart pounding, because this wasn't just about Karen anymore. This was a setup. And I had just walked into the center of it. The woods behind the cabin went dead silent. Even the birds had stopped. I crouched low, scanning the trees, trying to pick up any movement. The 3 figures were spreading out, flanking, working in sync, too tight for mercs, too loose for military. That meant one thing. Off-book. Contractors? Maybe. Ghosts, like me. My gut twisted. Whoever they weren't just here to scare me, they were here to finish something. I slipped around the side of the cabin, signaling Sierra with a quick flash of my laser. Hold fire until visual confirm, I whispered into the mic. She replied with a soft click. I knew she was already dialed in from the ridge. But just as I moved into position, another signal came through, this time from the encrypted tablet. It was a live ping from an old contact buried deep in a federal database. Codename, Beacon. Status, compromised. Location, my cabin. That didn't make sense. Beacon was a protected asset. Someone who disappeared years ago after leaking intel about a classified joint surveillance op. Only a handful of people ever knew their true identity. And now, somehow, their signal was coming from here inside. My cabin. I ran back in, checked every square inch, flipped the panel on the floor. Nothing. Until I spotted Chris's bag, half-sipped, shoved under the coffee table. I yanked it open. Tucked inside, hidden beneath layers of clothes, was a satellite phone still warm, active. Linked to beacon signal, my pulse spiked. Chris wasn't just visiting. He brought this here. And suddenly, everything clicked. Karen's hostility. The shadow team in the woods, the coded signal I intercepted, they weren't after me. They were after him. I stared out the window, heart pounding. Whatever Chris was mixed up in, it was bigger than any HOA feud. Now, every second we hesitated was pulling us deeper into something we might not crawl out of. A sudden flash of movement caught my eye. One of the figures broke the tree line, crouching low near the propane tank by the shed. They weren't just surrounding us. They were preparing for something explosive. I had seconds to react. I grabbed the sat phone from Chris's bag and yanked the battery out. If they were tracking that signal, I had to kill it now. Chris stirred, barely conscious, but when he saw the phone in my hand, his eyes widened. "Don't let them take it," he mumbled. "It's not just about me." Before I could ask more, the Ridge Erupta Sierra took the first shot. Clean, sharp, precise. One of the intruders dropped. The other two scrambled for cover, but my team was already moving. Clay and Malik closed in from the opposite side, driving the Mercs back toward the tree line. It wasn't a firefight, was a takedown. Quick, silent, surgical. They didn't expect resistance like this. Not from a cabin in the woods. Karen, still outside, screamed as she hit the ground. Hands over her head like she had no idea what was happening. But I knew better. One of the men we captured had a patch under his vest, barely visible, but familiar. A private intel group that had gone dark 3 years ago after being tied to black site asset extractions. Karen must have been working with them all along, feeding them information, baiting targets. And Chris E. wasn't just a whistleblower. He was Beacon. He had faked his own death years ago to escape. The very group she was tied to as the dust settled and the authorities finally arrived, real ones this time. Karen played innocent, claimed she didn't know who those men were, said she just called in a favor. But it was too late. We had the footage, the phone, and the one thing she didn't expect: Chris, alive and ready to testify. But just as they took her away, one of the captured operatives looked me dead in the eyes and smirked. "You think this is over?" he whispered. That's when I realized we hadn't stopped something. We'd just exposed the beginning.